Good morning and welcome to Press Corner here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar, and our guests. Press Corner is our regular Sunday morning review of key events with our colleagues in the media and other experts here in the heart of Europe. On Press Corner, we celebrate the privilege of a free press by listening to diverse opinions and letting our audience reach their own conclusions. Today, our guests are Jakub Biernat. He's a journalist with Belsat TV. Welcome, Jakub.
Hello.
Joe Harper, he's a reporter. And our very own Benjamin Lee, who many of you will recognise as one of our anchors. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
So I'd like us to start off talking about President Duda's visit to China. There's lots of speculation about what he's doing there and the expected outcome. But before we get into that, we have a short video I'd like to share with you and our audience.
Duda is set to discuss trade and geopolitical issues with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, as well as with Premier Li Qiang. A number of trade agreements are expected to be signed during the meeting. The president also hopes to negotiate greater access to the Chinese market for Polish farmers, especially better export conditions for Polish meat exporters. Duda has given significant attention to China as part of his foreign policy.
We are beginning our journey to China for a very important visit. This will be my third trip to the country since I became the president of Poland. The first took place in 2015, right after I took office. Then there was the state visit of President Xi Jinping to Poland in 2016. After that, I went to see the opening of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, which was an unofficial visit. But I also had the opportunity to speak personally with President Xi Jinping.
The president also plans to discuss geopolitical issues and emphasize the impact of Russia's recent actions in Ukraine on the Chinese economy. One example is the blockade of railways that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative and run through Ukraine. Duda's visit is scheduled to run through Wednesday and will include appearances at economic forums in Dalian and Shanghai.
Right, so it sounds like a pretty full agenda, right? He's got a lot on his plate, according to this. I mean, he says also that he intends to raise the subject of peace in Ukraine and to discuss economic relationships with China. Joe, I'll start with you. Give me an overview of what you think the main agenda and outcomes are from this visit, in your view.
I think Duda is struggling at home, like domestically. Mm-hmm. So, to some extent, this is a diversion. Okay. I think in the geopolitical arena, it probably has more significance in terms of support that China has been giving to the Kremlin. In terms of the economics of it, I imagine there are certain long-term contracts, between companies and so on.
Right.
So that plays a role. But I suspect it's the geopolitics of it.
So if I understand you correctly, Joe, what you're saying is that you're hoping that these conversations between Duda and Chinese officials are going to kind of allow China to place some pressure on Russia to rein back in Ukraine, something like that. Is that?
I doubt if that will happen, but yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean that would be Duda's intention.
Okay.
Whether or not that will be achieved in any way, I don't know. I'm not sure quite what leverage Poland has.
Right.
In relation to China,
Okay.
probably very little, but every little counts, right?
Sure, absolutely. And of course, there is also the economic aspect, which you mentioned, and opening up perhaps the Polish market to Chinese investment might be something that will form part of those conversations. Jakub, what do you think?
I think basically the same, that Duda went there to tell Chinese officials to stop helping Russia in war in Ukraine, and economically, I guess it's still the Polish-Chinese economical relation. I guess they still continue without too much politics. We understand that we are caught between China and US a bit in
Right.
some issues, like technological one, that US put pressure on Poland and the other European Western countries not to buy technology from China. But I guess Poland is exporting some crude stuff like meat or agriculture. So there's no big problem about that.
Yeah. So as an export market, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we see that exports to China don't come with no strings attached, Ben. What's in it for China to get involved and try and rein back Putin?
Well, like Joe here said, there's probably not a lot of leverage that Poland can use to convince China to back off of supporting Russia when it comes to the war in Ukraine.
Right.
But this is a collective attempt, I would say, by EU leaders to try to sway China to that direction. And one of the things that Duda brought up during his visit is the fact that the war in Ukraine would impede the Belt and Road Initiative, as part of the rail is actually within the Ukrainian soil. So I think Duda is also trying to apply the carrot and the stick kind of approach, saying that, hey, if you play good with the European countries, you get to continue trade, you get to have all these trade deals being signed, but if not, then it might impede your economic incentives. However, I don't think that's going to be as a convincing of an argument as we here would like it to be, as we do know that the trade relations between China and Russia is still relatively strong, at least compared to what Europe has to offer.
Well, I mean, China's getting a lot of oil from Russia, you know, and cheap oil, of course, which is in their strategic interest.
Right, that makes them some of the biggest benefactor of this war, actually. So just by kind of saying that, hey, we can continue this Belt and Road Initiative, which, frankly speaking, when it comes to the Central Eastern European region, the initiative in and of itself was not very successful in this part of the world. The 16 or 14+1 format was kind of dead in the water when it initiated, and ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, we already saw a downturn and eventually kind of grinding to a halt. So kind of enticing China with a revival of this format doesn't seem to be strong enough an incentive, at least to me, that could sway Putin in another direction.
Right. So Belt and Road Initiative, which is the connection between Asia, transportation connection between Asia and Europe, allowing easier and faster flow of goods. China's pet project, Xi Jinping's pet project, but it's actually facing some obstacles in Europe. So what about the fact that China has already shown an interest in investing in Europe? In Hungary, they're setting up production facilities. Slovakia seems to be going that way. Do you think there's a possibility that China may exert influence on Putin if they were allowed to invest in Poland as part of the quid pro quo? What do you think, Joe?
No.
No, you don't think so?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's that significant for the Chinese.
Okay.
I mean, I suspect it's. I mean, it's obviously a piece in the jigsaw puzzle, but no, I don't think. I'm not sure the extent to which the region counts that much in terms of Chinese strategic thinking. No, I mean, obviously it would be better in their strategic interest to keep kind of a position within Central and Eastern Europe, to keep on good terms with the leaders in the region and so on. But no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think the wider geopolitical picture is probably more significant.
The more significant. Well, speaking about significance, President Duda was not met by Xi Jinping at the airport, and the president is expected to have between 1 and 3 hours of Xi Jinping's time. It's a long visit. It's 4 days. Do you read anything into that? Both things, the length of the visit and the fact that President Duda isn't going to be given much time with Xi Jinping. Jakub.
I think this is the sign of how China perceives Poland. Yes.
Right.
So we are not strategic partner, but I would say that in this geopolitical situation of the war in Ukraine, China is very much afraid of Western sanctions,
right?
Which Poland is part of the West, in this way, and this collective pressure, I think, it's very important to sort the situation around Ukraine, because as we know, Chinese banks, they stopped operation with Russia the operation were moved to the really little small banks, which is not operate on the world's arena. And we see, I read in the, I guess, Reuters communique that the Chinese are afraid of the sanctions like they see the tiger almost. So we see that the pressure still works because it's not a full 100% support of Russia, and they are trying to sneak and hide, giving Russia, that's what they want, but also they understand that the market of Western Europe is much worthy than Russia, which got involved in this senseless war.
Ben, just in the last few seconds on this topic, there is, it has been said by a number of sources, there is a commonality in terms of the strategic ambitions of China, Russia and North Korea, and that commonality is the shift towards a new world order where democracies perhaps don't have the hegemony that these countries resent. How much of a role do you think that is going to play when Xi Jinping weighs up this triad, if you like, of countries and the influence that Europe is trying to exert on it to exert influence on Russia?
Well, as we can see in Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea, which we will probably discuss later, that there is an axis being formed right now.
Right.
And what they describe as the multipolar world, which is trying to challenge the American hegemony. In fact, one of the discussion is whether or not North Korea will be joining in China, Russia into the BRICS system. And we also saw in recent days that due to the heavy sanctions, Russia is no longer using the US dollar as their standard of foreign exchange currency. And you do have to keep in mind that the petrodollar deal has just expired. That is probably going to be a significant hit for the US dollar on the international market.
Right.
So with all these kind of factors going in together, we might look at an attempt here that is trying to replace the dominant economic power that is the United States. And with that alliance forming and perhaps accelerating due to the expiration of the petrodollar deal, well, it's really hard to predict what the future will hold, but it is something that is very alarming, and I think it's something that needs significant attention.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. So lots of moving pieces, as we've just heard from our guests, and some of them rather alarming. Of course, here at TVP World, we'll be keeping a close eye on those developments and keeping you informed. I'd like us to move on now to our next topic. There's been no doubt that Poland has been in the forefront of support for Ukraine since the invasion by Russia, both in terms of social areas as well as military support. However, there are some voices now which are saying that actually Poland, is not going to become involved and not going to get a fair share of contracts to rebuild Ukraine after the war ends. We'll be talking about that in just a minute, but again, as usual, we'll have a look at a short video clip first.
The Ukraine Restoration Conference was held in Berlin earlier this month. While the atmosphere was upbeat, the leaders present stressed the enormous scale of the task ahead.
The reconstruction and the modernization of the country will require massive investments. The World Bank estimates that nearly $500 billion will be needed over the next 10 years. The day after tomorrow, President Zelensky and I will see each other again at the G7 summit in Apulia. There I will lobby for far-reaching and long-lasting commitments for Ukraine.
Poland has hoped to profit from Ukraine's reconstruction given the country's proximity. Polish portal Onet has expressed concern about the amount of attention the Polish government is giving the issue. However, Paweł Kowal, the government's plenipotentiary for rebuilding Ukraine, has said that Polish companies are already taking part in the effort. While some places, such as Bakhmut, will have to wait until the end of the war to be reconstructed, others which have already been retaken by Ukraine are undergoing the process right now.
No one here today can say when the war will end, but what we can say is this: it will end. We will rebuild Ukraine, stronger, freer, and more prosperous than before. Millions of Ukrainians living in our countries now can be living bridges, women and men who speak the language of the other country, who work in companies here, and who may already tomorrow play an important role in the reconstruction of Ukraine.
While rebuilding Ukraine will take enormous time and funds, Kyiv has the backing of its Western allies, something which most conflict zones cannot enjoy.
Right, so the concern really stems from the fact that in the Iraq War, or rather at the end of the Iraq War, despite Poland being a member of NATO and being involved in that war, really didn't get any economic benefit at the end of it. They were awarded, no contracts at all, and the concern is that simply will be repeated this time around in Ukraine. Joe, what do you think? Do you agree with that view?
Well, I think a lot of countries outside of the US didn't really benefit from rebuilding Iraq either. I think there's a lot of concern within the NATO alliance between, I think the UK and France, for example, were unhappy about the outcome of the war in terms of contracts which were provided and so on. So I think the Americans tend to support their own domestic companies. So I'm not sure the extent to which Poland is different really from
Okay,
from
but it's different in this case, isn't it? In terms of the amount of support that they've given. Yes.
In terms of Ukraine, I think the expectation would be that Poland, would be and should be a front runner in terms of providing contracts and so on for rebuilding infrastructure, roads and so on. The article in On It.
Yeah,
I think in my view is that it was a little bit overplayed. The extent to which Polish companies can, compete on the international market is limited by factors other than the geopolitics of this. I think it's Poland's role in the kind of international supply chain generally kind of limits the extent to which Polish companies could be involved in the reconstruction process.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
So I think in those terms, a lot of Polish companies are part of Western firms which will probably win contracts, which was mentioned in the article, which I think is correct. But I think Poland can leverage within that framework. I think it can probably leverage some kind of role which is commensurate with its economic position.
Understood. So a number of factors. It's not that Ukraine doesn't want to give Poland contracts, but there are a number of factors, according to Joe, the supply chain and the fact that you're going to have large global companies probably involved in this. What do you think?
Right now, Poland is being reconstructed by big foreign companies.
Right.
They are not. It's not strictly Polish companies. Polish companies might be subcontractors for them. So. From this point of view, of course, I don't see that someone in Ukraine will give a big contract to build, highway in Ukraine. But still, I guess that Poland needs to, because we are a neighbor,
right,
should find a niche in the Ukrainian economy and invest its Polish companies' capitals to create joint venture companies that both Poland and Ukraine will profit. Yes, so. Still, it could be construction, it could be agriculture, transport, and so on.
Right. So opportunities can be created.
We should, search for opportunities first. Second, if Polish companies are involved, the best should be to use international funds
right.
for such undertakings. So we should see the profit after all, of course, for the common good.
Yeah, OK, I want to come back to the funding in just a second. Ben, I mean, clearly one of the areas of disagreement between Ukraine and Poland has been the farmers' dispute at the border. And I read a surprising statistic here, which said that basically from the average Ukrainian's perspective, Poland has dropped down in the list of favourite countries. And it's right now, it's in penultimate place just before Hungary. And one of the main reasons has been this agricultural dispute. What's your view on that? Does it surprise you?
Well, my view on that is I'm always, when it comes to discussing economics and politics and bundling together,
Right.
is that it might create sort of a perverse incentive. I would always stand by the fact that Poland is the kind of friend to Ukraine that Poland needed back in World War II.
Right.
And to kind of, well, this drop in favorability because of the farmer issue, of course, I understand on one hand, the economic impact of limitation of Ukrainian grain might hit them very hard, but also have to keep in mind that Poland has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine day one, and
Right.
of course, like, well, letting all the refugees in, and even some of our anchors here at the table have Ukrainian refugees staying at their own homes
Right.
to kind of help alleviate the situation. So yeah, in the first place, I think having this issue divide kind of the two nations and the population is something that I do not want to see. But on the one hand, even though I don't want to see that, it is something that is happening. So I would like to relate to the topic back that we're talking about, like whether or not this reconstruction and the fact that there's profit to be gained from it might create actually a perverse incentive and further kind of seep into politics and drive divide there, and some bickering because money is involved is also a topic that needs to be discussed going forward, especially given the fact of the wide scale of destruction that's being taking place in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
If the profit is something that is on most people's mind, will it be constructed in a way that is the most efficient and the most cost beneficial way to the rebuilding of Ukraine, of course, is another big question mark there.
Yeah, so the picture is becoming, as always in world politics, more and more complex, which, as Ben says, integrates different elements. Now, one of the challenges that has been put forward for Poland being given the opportunity to contribute to reconstruction is that Poland doesn't have access, for example, as German companies do, to funding pipelines, which the German government does support its companies with, whereas the Polish government does less of. And so they simply won't have the funding to get, to get involved with those projects. Joe, what do you think?
Can I just say before
please.
that, the research that I think you were referring to was Ukrainians' attitudes towards the Polish government.
Right.
I think, right? I mean, it was. I'm not sure exactly, but I think the Ukrainian attitudes towards Poles, Polish society, is still quite high. Yeah, I think it's different, and I think that's a function also of the fact that the Polish government was less inclined to help facilitate the incoming refugees from Ukraine, and Polish society was extremely open.
Right,
to do
right.
that. So it was a kind of almost a civic obligation or duty which was taken upon itself by the Polish people.
Right.
So it may be that may somehow skew the situation
absolutely.
a little bit. So, and the change of government, obviously last year, hasn't changed the grain issue, hasn't changed that conflict, but it's. It's a question of optics, I think. The new government's come in and said that we're going to be more overtly pro-Ukraine.
Okay.
Right, so maybe the optics will change and maybe the government side will catch up with the social side.
Right.
In terms of your question, sorry, I've forgotten what it was now.
The credit lines issued by the government.
Well, that's something that can be resolved, right?
Yes.
I mean, the Germans have long-term credit line policy. They have a strategy of doing this, and it works in a very Germanic, in a very Germanic way, right? And the Poles, the Polish way of doing things is probably a little bit more ad hoc. It's obviously also Polish economy is weaker, right? It's poorer than the German, so I think what was said earlier about somehow finding a niche or finding places where Polish companies can actually exert most financial gain, accrue most financial gain, will be the game that's going to be played.
Absolutely. And I suppose related to that, I mean, you mentioned EU funding earlier. So that's actually the topic of our next conversation, Jakub. So you can obviously see into the future, I can tell. So thank you for that. We are going now to the European Union, and actually a rather unusual topic to start off with, and that is bears in Slovakia. Basically, there are lots of them. The constitution disallows any culling of bears, and so we're having a surplus of these guys, and they're actually attacking people with lots of, well, not lots of, but there have been a number of humans killed by them. Let's watch this short video.
The European Union wants the member states to restore 20% of their land and water areas. The proposal finally passed this month after months of strong opposition from most states. After some provisions were watered down, the legislation passed by a narrow margin, thanks to the vote of Austria, which had previously opposed it. Austria's climate minister, Leonor Gewessler of the Green Party, voted for the bill against the explicit instructions of Chancellor Karl Nehammer. Her decision could lead to the collapse of the coalition between Nehammer's Austrian People's Party and the Greens. It might also land Gewessler in jail, as the People's Party has announced that it will file criminal charges against her for her abuse of power. The law has been protested by farmers across the EU, as have other strong environmental measures. The farmers are concerned that the measures will increase their costs and put some of them out of business, which would also affect the bloc's food security. Another controversy associated with the law is the case of the Slovakian bears. Slovakia's Deputy Prime Minister, Tomáš Taraba, said that his country had agreed to support the law in exchange for the approval of a law allowing the killing of some bears near residential areas. The European Commission denies that such an agreement took place, but the rising number of bear attacks on humans has become a political issue in the country, with 13 such incidents last year alone. A woman was also killed by a bear in March this year.
Right, so although, we started off with the topic of bears, really, as we saw in that video, there is really the common link between that and the restoration of land in Europe. They're both coming from EU regulations, okay? So the EU is giving Slovakia permission to cull bear, and also the EU is imposing an obligation on EU countries, member countries, to restore 20% of their land. Overview, Joe, what do you think?
Well, it's a kind of sideshow, I think.
Which one? Both?
Well, the bear issue, I think, is a sideshow. I think the bigger issue, obviously, is what's happening. Yeah. In terms of the relationship, obviously, between Brussels, the executive, the Commission, and the member states. You've got Slovakia on the edge. Politically, obviously geographically, but politically on the edge, pushing for more kind of independence within the strictures of the European Union. Right. And you've also got a coalition government in Slovakia, which is being pushed by a minority part of the coalition, which is actually quite far right. So I think this bear issue is kind of a symbolic gesture to say that we can. It's almost as if we're the ones that can control our nature. Yeah? Nature has this kind of symbolic force. Yeah? We control our own borders. Right. In a sense, that's what I think it's saying. I don't think this quid pro quo that was reported. I'm not sure the extent to which that doesn't happen very often. Yes. If that makes sense. Yes, of course. I think that's the European Union, that's the way things are done. Some give and take, this is a negotiation. We just don't hear about most of it. We don't, agreed. But I think the issue that was being raised was the amount of influence that the EU executive has over, things like the bear issue in Slovakia, but also demanding the restoration of 20% of land to its original habitat or its original state. But there is no mention, Jakub, of
EU funding to support the process.
And that's a problem because that means some losses for farmers in the EU countries, which is very sensitive issue in Poland, as we see, because we are still very much agricultural country.
Right.
The percentage of farmers are much bigger than in the rest of Europe, for some historical reasons, first of all. As we remember, during the communist times, they didn't make collectivization of the farmlands that we see in other communist countries. So we have a lot of small farms. And we must understand that for Polish farmers, the land is something sacred, almost. This is not only the land. This is something which was in the families for the centuries. They were working hard for it. So I understand why in Poland we see this. This is not only economical question, I guess. This is cultural question.
Cultural, social,
and so on. And the poor EU must deal with this,
right.
with this fact. Although I think that that we keep this older form of farming, it's good for economy, because Polish farmlands, Polish villages are still resource for the economy, because people
right.
there, they know how to work and they work very hard.
Of course, generational experience that they bring to the farming process. Ben, just very quickly again, the Prime Minister Tusk has said that the government plans to link the restoration of wetlands and the flooding of farmland as mandated by the Nature Restoration Law to the construction of the so-called Shield East. And this is, just to remind everyone, is a way of protecting the borders of Poland against any invasion by adversaries. What do you think of the idea, and how do you think the two are linked?
Well, first of all, I would agree with Joe here that this bear issue is sort of a sideshow, but it's also a very good chasm to look into some of these European Union regulations. And as Jakub aptly pointed out, that this has significant impact to countries that are more relying on the agricultural sector for their GDP. And this blanket application of 20% of land might affect some country more than others. And I think this is perhaps one of the reasons why we see some of the greener parties taking a beating in the European Parliament elections, because of these kind of blanket application of these more environmental aspect of things that is not taking into the country's economies into account.
Right.
So back to your question, I think Tusk's decision to fuse that into the Shield East project is actually a very economically efficient one, as it is a project that they have already been pursuing. It's something that, Poland desperately needs a sort of defense mechanism to deter its invaders. There's already funding dedicated to that.
Right.
So if that can be in any way, shape, or form massage into that 20% number that was given, and because there will be like some flooding of places, restoration, if you will, but there will be some terrain forming to some extent to form this natural barrier, natural deterrence. So if somehow they can designate that part of the land and kind of show the EU that these land are can in fact count as the restoration of natural habitat, that would kind of minimize the damage that it could deal to the agriculture sector, as these were already repatriated land that's being used in the first place.
So it would facilitate the implementation. It would basically kill two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless they have any more rules on killing birds.
After all, we can't forget that Poland is a very dehydrated country, so we have problem with water every summer.
Right.
Maybe not to this extent as in a much warmer countries, but still So after all, it would be good for the agriculture, I guess, but also the government needs to somehow make people believe it, because also, you know, Polish farmers are, I'm not really sure what is their perspective of it, you know. They are thinking more year-to-year profit than to...
Right. Well, the small farming
especially small farming.
Yeah. OK, well, thank you very much for that, actually. We shall, you know, I think this is a story that's going to run, and we'll be watching, as always. I'd like us to move on now to President Vladimir Putin, who's on his travels again. And he's recently visited North Korea. He is now in Vietnam, and the visits are causing some concern in the region. Let's have a look at this short video.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un received Russian President Vladimir Putin in a visibly warm manner, in addition to the pompous courtesies and what could very well be a genuine expression of friendship between two inseparable leaders. Important decisions were made during the trip. Russia and North Korea signed a mutual defense pact, pledging to come to each other's aid in the event of foreign aggression.
I have no doubt that this powerful treaty signed between our two countries will be very constructive, prospective, strictly peace-loving and defensive, aimed at promoting and defending the fundamental interests of the people of both countries, which will be a driving force to accelerate the creation of a new multinational world free from domination, subjugation, hegemony, and unilateral authority.
Putin's effort to tighten relations with North Korea have led to a backlash from South Korea. Seoul may now aid Ukraine in response.
정부는 어제 북한과 러시아가
The government expressed serious concerns and condemned the comprehensive strategic partnership agreement signed between North Korea and Russia, which aims to strengthen their mutual military and economic cooperation.
엄중한 우려를 표하며 이를 규탄한다.
South Korea's formidable defense industry may soon be supplying much-needed ammunition to the Donbass. North Korea has already begun transferring some of its ammunition to Moscow. The war in Ukraine may soon turn into a kind of an inter-Korean proxy war. Putin has also visited Vietnam, where he accused Western countries of trying to destabilize the Asia-Pacific region. This may not work too well, given that Vietnam appears to be more worried about Chinese expansionism than about its former arch-nemesis, the United States. Hanoi has even begun importing arms from the U.S., while the Kremlin may have hoped to forge strong ties with all of Washington's enemies. It appears that they are not all that powerful or eager to antagonize the world's biggest military spender.
Right, Joe. Now, you know, countries in the region are concerned, Japan and South Korea being two of them. I mean, on the one hand, they're already facing threats from China, but they're also facing the threat of Russia arming North Korea, even perhaps with nuclear weaponry. How do you see this jockeying for position that's happening in the region?
Well, I think Putin, this may be a function of Putin believing that he needs somehow to articulate the global South perspective. Yeah, he's trying to create, or he has created in some sense, an alliance of those in the global South that are not necessarily supportive of, you know, what they consider to be American hegemony. So
right.
I suspect this. I mean, this is this is an extension of that. It's a part of that strategy.
Right.
Right. In terms of South Korea, that's a very interesting example of where politics and economics cross over. I mean, South Korea is a big supplier of arms to Poland. Right? I mean, it signed massive contracts with Poland. Its relationship with Ukraine, potentially for the South Korean defense sector, it's a big market, right? I mean, you know, this may push that door open a little bit further, and we may see some kind of change. In terms of the geopolitics of it, I'm not sure. I think Russia's Putin's strategy in relation to China is probably the most significant for the reasons that we talked about earlier.
Right.
Vietnam, North Korea, they're kind of marginal players, right? I mean, within this, but they have a kind of symbolic presence, and in the same way that Poland can exert pressure through NATO or through the European Union, develop alliances and so on. Vietnam and North Korea can do the same thing within the Asian community, I guess. I mean,
yes.
So it's kind of, I think it's probably Putin trying to bolster that strategy of small alliances, of kind of, making sure that they're on board, they're on side, and also probably there are certain economic, trade agreements that are being signed and other things.
Yes. Just briefly, Jakub, your view on the economic trade agreements, because Vietnam was slowly being seen as an alternative to China.
For me, more surprising was Putin's visit in Vietnam. However, I guess because Vietnam was trying to ally a bit with the US against China, and now we see Vietnam's comrades inviting Putin's. But I think that they are looking for some short-time profits out of it. They see that
the
Vietnamese that Russia is in need. They can sell them something. They can buy something from Russia. I don't think that there will be part of some global South.
Yes, but they would need to overcome the sanctions that exist with
that's right.
with Russia, and it risks spoiling the relationship with the West.
Yeah, and I have another remark. We say that the visit in North Korea was very warm for Putin.
Yes,
I'm sorry. The standards are really low right now. I saw the visit of Romanian dictator Ceausescu in 86, and they invited him and showed him like 1 hour of human animation with cardboards of the Communist Party of Romania, with Romanian signs on it. So I guess this time it wasn't so warm.
It wasn't as warm as it may seem. Ben, now, Rahm Emanuel, the US ambassador to Japan, describes Putin's burst of activity in Asia as your worst fears come true. What do you think he meant?
Well, first of all, I think there is a little bit of hyperbole there, but it does also show some warning signs. I agree with Jakub here that I would actually look at the trip to Vietnam as a more significant event compared to that of North Korea, as we already know that North Korea and Putin has a relationship.
Right.
You have to remember this comes at after the heels of the Ukraine peace summit, and that was a coalition-building exercise that is trying to showcase that Russia is isolated from the rest of the world. So it's already taken a hit that China is not on board with part of it, and now the fact that Vietnam, a country like I guess I have mentioned, has been leaning towards allying to the West gradually, taking that step back and actually receive Putin, even though of course it's not like a very warm reception, it's still an alarming sign that perhaps there's also on a messaging front, there's an attempt there at either showcasing that they're not as isolated as the West would like it to be, or a parallel kind of society economy is being built right now. We might look at Russia, China, North Korea forming their own economic bubble using their own currency. And of course, globally, that would create some trouble. And I think it could be another attempt at challenging the U.S. economic hegemony.
Right. I mean, they didn't arrest Putin, which, of course, under the ICC warrant would ask them to do. So clearly, as you say, they're opening the door to a long-term relationship. In the last few seconds that we have, Joe, China is North Korea's largest trading partner, and its biggest influence. Again, does this simply reaffirm what we were saying earlier about the Chinese, Russian, North Korean axis? And going back to our first topic of conversation, is President Duda's visit overly optimistic?
North Korea is a riddle, right? I mean, nobody really knows what's going on there and what their intentions are and their strategies. I mean, they're dependent economically on China, politically, I guess, as well. I don't know. I mean, Duda's visit, I think it's a precursor to others' visits.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it may be a kind of testing of the waters. It may be a kind of, a way in which other European leaders of more kind of political clout can see what the reactions are,
right.
Test the waters a little bit,
and then develop some kind of strategy. In response,
and then see what the reaction is. Geopolitically, how this recalibrates potentially,
right.
Other people's perceptions of what's happening there. The bigger tectonic plates probably won't be moved by this, right? Unless this has some kind of significant outcome, which it probably won't.
And we are somewhat sceptical, it seems. So, unfortunately, the clock has beaten us, as so often happens. So much more to talk about. But I'd like to thank our guests, Mr. Joe Harper. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Jakub Biernat. Thank you, Jakub. And, of course, our very own Mr. Benjamin Lee. That's all from us here on Press Corner. Have a wonderful Sunday. Goodbye.